Good. Well, thanks. This is a little bit different for me. Normally, I'm talking a lot about alewife and stocking numbers and Chinook salmon, but the issue of the day has been steelhead returns to our rivers. So there's been a lot of interest in harvest limits with that. And if there's time, I'll still get into some of the usual basin updates. And I'm not advancing. There we go. And so you might ask, why change harvest bag limits? And there's a lot of biological reasons too, but mainly we're trying to maintain a spawning stock or enough adult fish that they can spawn and sustain the population. And sometimes you get diseases or something affects recruitment. Over harvest sometimes can be an issue. And so if over harvest is an issue, you might want to change the bag limit to make sure you got enough adult fish to spawn. On the opposite side, sometimes we have an overabundance of fish, and sometimes they're causing problems with the whole ecosystem, like overpredation. You've seen in Saginaw Bay with the expansion of walleye that there's an increase in the bag limit there. In Lake Michigan, we've kept Chinook salmon limits at 5. Despite the fact that people wanted them lower because we had an overabundance of predation in Lake Michigan. So we wanted people to harvest fish. Another biological issue, which is more with human health, is we may have a no bag limit or a lower bag limit if fish have a lot of contaminants in them. A lot of our interest in bag limits actually are social. So people might want a trophy fishery, so you lower the bag limit or increase size limits to achieve that. Sometimes there's just a number that's more fair or ethical. Do people need to catch 100 perch, or is the current 25 fish fair enough? In our rivers, I think what we're seeing is, people comparing the lake harvest to the river harvest. So if one was higher than the other, you might want to change the bag limit. And then people are talking about with lower returns to our rivers that they want to recycle more fish. So have a lower bag limit in our rivers when the steelhead returns are lower, just so people have a more chance to catch the same fish more than once. So there's been a history of folks wanting to look at steelhead limits. It used to be 5 in Lake Michigan and in our river systems. And in 1989, it changed to 3, along with Chinook salmon. And part of that was because of the BKD era of Chinooks. And then a lot of pressure was put on steelhead in the Chinook's absence. So there's a lot of angler interest to go to 3, and so it's remained 3 ever since. In the past 10 years, I know as either a biologist or a manager have talked to angler and angler groups about bag limits. The first was a statewide bag limit reduction, and once we took it to the public, it didn't go anywhere. Same with keying in on a couple of Lake Michigan tributaries, Muskegon, Manistee, Pere Marquette. Those didn't get the public support that we wanted to see. And then when we started marking all steelhead with the mass marking program, there became an opportunity to have a lower limit on wild steelhead. Some other states do that, and that never got out of our cold water committee. So there's strong interest by some groups, but not entirely by the all angler groups. So we haven't done it yet, but now there's a new interest. I'm hearing a lot from guides and some anglers that they would like to at least have an opportunity to recycle more fish on our river systems. And just to see what other states are doing, Ohio has a 5-fish steelhead, but they go down to 2 in the fall. Pennsylvania has a 5 during most of the summer, but they go to 3 in this early spring and fall or winter. And New York and Lake Erie has a 3-fish bag limit, but in Lake Ontario, they have a 2 in the lake and 1 in the tributaries. Minnesota has 5, but you can't keep any wild fish. So that's an interesting one. And then Lake Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin are still at 5. So I put Michigan kind of in the middle of that. When I do a quick biological review, and I'll show some snapshots of some data that we have, when we look at what's going on with steelhead, I can say they're big and healthy. We're seeing some personal bests being caught in the last few years. So the ones that are out there are doing well. Stocking's been very consistent through the years, and in fact has increased. So there's not, and I don't think it's an issue with stocking. Except for in 2020, we didn't do an egg take, and so we can't stock any steelhead this year. But our stock systems seem to be having good returns. Smoke production in our wild systems seems to be reasonable, and we'll look at that. And the harvest is really fairly low in Lake Michigan, and I don't have any indication of high harvest on our rivers, but we don't have very good data for that. But again, the runs have been lower in the past few years, and some anglers are becoming concerned. One way to look at sizes, or a database we use, is our Master Angler program. And in the last 5 years or so, we've had a lot more entries into that program, indicating that there's bigger fish out there, I guess, at least bigger fish, compared to what we saw, around 2008 or so. And it begs the question, were people catching a lot more fish back in 2008, but they were smaller? So biomass is the same, but it's just been shifted to fewer, bigger fish. That's something to think about. We often are asked, how much are we stocking? You must have changed stocking, or you're not stocking as many steelhead as you used to. And this database goes back to 1980, and we're actually stocking more steelhead than we ever have, slowly increasing. And the size of our steelhead have been increasing too. We've been doing changes at our Thompson State Fish Hatchery, and we're getting the size up to that smolting size that they need to be, 6+ inches. And so the quality of the fish seem to be good. So I don't think it's a hatchery issue or a stocking issue. Looking at other river systems, this is on the St. Joe River, thanks Indiana, South Bend Fish Ladder. They're still counting fish there that run through the ladder. And, it's variable from year to year, but that blue bar or blue box is what they had in 2020. So it's still pretty good run going through there. So no major change in that system. And that's a heavily stocked system by both Indiana and Michigan. And just some more recent data, because I could find they actually had some 2021 data to share. And this is South Bend Fish Ladder again, and then their March passage. So just to see what was going on this winter, early spring for the run, and they have one of the best counts they've had in March. So some systems are having pretty good runs this spring, and maybe it's the heavily stocked systems. So trying to look at some of our wild systems. So this is the Pere Marquette in blue, Manistee River in the orange color. And we have an index station at both sites, so we're in there frequently. These aren't surveys that exclusively look for smolts, but we are catching young rainbows as part of the survey. And so I'm just putting in, what the number we see per acre. And, we have seen a little bit of decline recently in those smolt numbers, but, not historic lows. But we were seeing some pretty good smolt production out of those systems in the mid 90s, especially in the PM and around 2010 to 2014 in the Little Manistee River. So maybe there is some kind of environmental impact or something going on some of our river systems. One thing we have seen, this is NOAA precipitation data, and our 5-year rolling average is the highest it's ever been with this data. So other than, I'd say 2021, but this is a 5-year average, We've had significant precipitation. We've seen the Great Lakes rise quickly and get to historic levels, and this is part of the reasons because of the precipitation. So maybe some of these wild systems are getting too much flows and things like that, causing a survival issue with different ages of smolts. So we talk about harvest. Are people catching too many? So this is Lake Michigan, lake-wide harvest. So this is all the states contributing: Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan. And, we had really high harvest in the early 80s, but has since gone down. Chinook are typically the most part of the harvest. And they've gone up and down. They were down. Chinook were down in the bacterial kidney days in the mid 90s, came back up in the 2000s and have come down. But steelhead really haven't changed a whole lot through that time series. They did increase during the bacterial kidney disease days, but we're not seeing significant harvest in steelhead in the big lake right now. And just to look at that, this is the same data, just pulling out the steelhead. And, our harvest has actually been fairly consistent over the last 10 years or so. Certainly not as high as it was in the late 90s. So I don't think big lake harvest is the issue. So not knowing what's going on biologically, we also have to do a social review of this. What are people thinking? What are their expectations on a river? There was a question about expectations and bag limits in the question and answer. So maybe expectations are changing and people want to see a change. Maybe they're not seeing the super high catches they had 5 years ago. Maybe that was an extreme good time, and now we're back to a more average, perhaps below average. So we try to measure. It's hard to measure if you don't have the data, and we haven't been able to do river data or creel in quite a while. A lot of it's 10 years old, so we don't really know what anglers are catching on the river systems. So we can't even tell how close you're getting to an existing limit to even suggest what a different limit should be. We are planning a creel on the Muskegon in 2023, so hopefully that will help us to compare to some of the older data. We don't have guide data. One of the greatest things we've done in the Great Lakes is have charter captains report their catch, and that gives us annual data that we can use by port and for the whole lake. That's very useful to see what harvest is like. I'd love to see that a guide bill go through that would require guides to report, and that would give us a great data source. We're always looking for voluntary data, and I appreciate all the work that Dan's done to start the Great Lakes Angler Diary program. So if you're not part of that, please join that. And that's another way that we can get good data for lots of our river systems, and that would at least give us something to go by. And we've got the coded wire tag program now, mass marking all steelhead. So if you catch a steelhead with the adipose fin clip and you keep it, turn in that head, that's going to give us a lot of information. And another way we can learn about this is to do more social surveys. And we're thinking about that, trying to see what the angler values are now, what their expectations are for, harvest of some of these species. And maybe it's changing over time. So I would expect to see a social type survey come out in the next month or two. So with that, I'm going to shift over to some general updates for Lake Michigan, but I wanted to give people a chance to take a poll. And so this is just what is your preferred steelhead limit? And what I'm really thinking about is on tributaries, Lake Michigan tributaries. And I've got 0, 1, 2, 3. 3 is our existing bag limit, and 5, which is what we used to have and what the other states on Lake Michigan have. So We don't necessarily have to go lower. We can stay the same or increase. So if you'd like to take that survey now, I'd appreciate it. And I understand that this is just a simple survey, but we'll get more specific in future surveys. So 38% staying the same. If you wanted to increase, and then some interest to go to 2, 1, and less interest to go to 0. So that's interesting, and typically what we see with a general angler survey, that there's usually most interest in the existing bag limit. So thank you for doing that. There we go. So some quick Lake Michigan updates. One is we're hearing a lot of complaints about prey assessments and what bottom trawls are finding, or even the acoustic survey. And things have really seemed to have changed recently in like the USGS and our crew's ability to collect alewife. You know, it might be the clear water, it might be where they're feeding now, and our gear is just not catching them like they used to, because anglers seem to see more than we do. So I just wanted to mention that USGS is listening to that, and they're looking at some new technology for sonar that they can tow behind the boat that would look towards the surface if they're missing alewife that are on the surface. And they're looking at drone technology with sail drones that are very quiet and can sail across the surface and hopefully not disturb alewife and other prey as it's moving across the lake, and take acoustic type measurements and see if they can get better estimates that way. So we are looking into it. Also mentioning that we're trying to manage with Lake Michigan with limited data now. 2020, weren't able to get a lot of information, you know, other than voluntary head returns. We didn't have a lot of heads turned in. You know, luckily we've had a reward program, or the Great Lakes Salmon Initiative, Captain Chuck's 2 in Ludington, and Moonshine Lures put some prizes together, and we gave rewards for heads turned in through a drawing, and you know, that helped us get an extra 600 heads. So that really helped, and I appreciate everyone that was involved with that. You know, we missed part of the creel season, and we had no predator-prey ratio to go by. So it's been tough to know where we're at in the lake system. We were fortunate to have some of our biologists, Ben Terjak and Jory Jonas, help us estimate what the predator-prey ratio would be. They did a ratio or relationship between the weir weights of Chinook salmon with the predator-prey ratio, and they got pretty tight relationship. So they overlaid that with the predator-prey ratio and estimated what the 2020 number would be, and we're still fairly low in that ratio, meaning that there's a lower number of Chinook or biomass of Chinook compared to alewife. So we're in a good balanced situation, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we have buku alewife out there, but they are slightly, the alewife biomass is slightly higher, we think, and the Chinook biomass has been going lower. And so we're in a pretty good balance. And so I'm comfortable with some stocking increases or small increases because of that. And I'll just quickly go over, the table shows what on the very right side, our stocking plan for this year, and we actually have started it. We plan on stocking 879,000 Chinook salmon this year. That's an extra 225,000 because we did not stock steelhead. So we used those Chinook equivalents. And most of that increase is already gone into Grand Haven and St. Joe into net pens. And we're also net penning 75,000 at Muskegon, 228,000 at the Willimantic River, and 92,000 in Medusa. And we plan on stocking 296,000 brown trout. Most of those have been stocked from Ludington to the north. 1.5 million coho, 2.1 million lake trout, with most of them up in the northern refuge. In 2020, most of those were nearshore stocked, and this year there'll be a combination of nearshore and offshore. And then again with steelhead, we don't have any yearlings, but we will put in 300,000 fall fingerlings. And for 2022, I got a lot of question marks because do we want to stay at this 879,000 number, go back down to 654,000 and go up to a higher number like 1 million Chinook salmon? And we'll have a salmon subcommittee, some groups working to make some recommendations on that for the Lake Michigan Basin team as well as the citizens advisors. So we'll be working out what that number will be for 2022. And just to mention a couple habitat projects, one is Pucker Street Dam removal on the Dowagiac River. That's going to open up 150 miles of cold water habitat. So maybe get some good wild production of steelhead and salmon in that system. And then just mention reef work. Someone mentioned getting rid of quagga mussels and zebra mussels, and this is some work that's done on Good Harbor Reef where they've removed mussels from rocks and then watch to see what happens. And actually, once you remove them, the gobies can keep up with the younger mussels and keep those rocks clean. So works good on a small scale, but if we can get the technology to remove mussels on a large scale, that could be a game changer. So I think I'm running a little long, but maybe I can answer questions type them out in the Q&A, Dan.